The decision was made. The die was cast. In the small, anonymous hotel room, surrounded by the sleeping city, we had committed ourselves to a course of action that was as reckless as it was necessary. The knowledge that Colonel Moran was still at large, a free and desperate man, had transformed our investigation into a frantic, high-stakes race. The prize was the life of Lord Vance. The forfeit was our own. Our brief period of recovery had been a mere pause, a catching of breath before the final desperate sprint. The exhaustion still clung to us, a deep, bone-weary fatigue, but it was overshadowed by a surge of adrenaline, a sense of impending confrontation that sharpened the senses and focused the mind. Holmes, in particular, seemed to draw strength from the very desperation of our circumstances. The greater the danger, the more impossible the odds, the more alive he became. "We must move now, Watson," he said, his voice low and urgent, a stark contrast to the quiet stillness of the pre-dawn hour. "Moran is a creature of the night. He will use the cover of darkness to make his next move. He may already be on his way to the chapel, to silence the one man who can expose his entire conspiracy. We must intercept him." Our preparations were swift and Spartan. We had no time for elaborate disguises or complex strategies. Our only allies were the remaining hours of darkness and the element of surprise. Holmes, however, did insist on one small but crucial detour. He scribbled a hasty note, sealed it in an envelope, and gave it to our nervous hotel proprietor with a handful of coins and a stern instruction. "See that this is delivered to Inspector Lestrade at Scotland Yard immediately," he commanded. "It is a matter of the utmost urgency. The life of a man depends on it." The note, he explained to me as we slipped out into the cold, dark streets, contained the location of the chapel and a brief, cryptic summary of our intentions. It was a failsafe, a final roll of the dice. "Lestrade is a plotter, Watson," Holmes said, his voice a low murmur as we navigated the deserted streets of Lambeth. "But he is a tenacious one. He will not understand the subtleties of the situation, but he will understand the need for action. He will bring the full force of the law to bear on St. Giles. He will be too slow to aid us in the initial confrontation, but he may be in time to pick up the pieces." It was a grim but necessary precaution, a tacit acknowledgement of the very real possibility that we might not survive the night. Our journey to St. Giles' Rookery was a descent into the dark, beating heart of London's poverty and despair. The character of the city changed with every street we crossed. The quiet, respectable squares of Lambeth gave way to a maze of narrow, winding alleys and grimy, overcrowded tenements. The air grew thick with the smell of coal smoke, unwashed humanity, and a general sense of decay. This was a world, apart from the elegant drawing rooms and manicured estates we had frequented during the earlier stages of our investigation. This was the London of the forgotten, the dispossessed, a place where life was cheap and hope was a foreign currency. As we drew closer to our destination, Holmes's demeanor changed. He became even more alert, his senses on a knife's edge. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, his eyes scanning every darkened doorway, every shadowed alley. He had shed the persona of the contemplative philosopher and had become the hunter, a creature of instinct and action. He had also, I noticed, armed himself. In addition to my own service revolver, Holmes now carried a small but deadly pocket pistol, its compact frame concealed within the folds of his coat. It was a weapon he rarely used, but its presence was a stark reminder of the life-or-death nature of our mission. To gather more immediate, on-the-ground intelligence, Holmes decided to call upon his most trusted and unconventional assets, the Baker Street Irregulars. We made our way to a pre-arranged meeting point, a grimy all-night coffee stall near the edge of the rookery. A few coded words to the proprietor, a man whose loyalty Holmes had secured years ago, were all that was needed. Within minutes, they began to appear, materializing from the shadows like small, ragged ghosts. It was Wiggins and his small army of street urchins, their faces dirty, their clothes in tatters, but their eyes sharp and intelligent. They were the eyes and ears of Holmes's invisible empire, the unseen agents who could move through the city's underbelly with an impunity that no police officer could ever hope to achieve. Holmes gathered them around him, his voice low and urgent. He gave them their instructions with a clarity and precision that would have done credit to a field marshal deploying his troops. They were to scout the area around the abandoned chapel, to observe any and all activity, to note the presence of any guards or lookouts, and to report back to him with their findings. "You are my eyes, my boys," he told them, his voice a mixture of command and affection. "Be swift, be silent, and above all, be careful. The men we are dealing with are dangerous. Do not engage them, simply observe and report." The boys scattered, melting back into the darkness as silently as they had come. They were a small, ragged army, but their knowledge of the rookery's labyrinthine geography and their ability to move unseen and unheard made them an invaluable asset. As we waited for their reports, Holmes and I took refuge in the shadows of a nearby alley. The steam from the coffee stall, a welcome, if fleeting, source of warmth. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching our nerves to the breaking point. The city was beginning to stir around us, the first faint signs of the approaching dawn painting the eastern sky in shades of grey and purple. The clock was ticking. Our window of darkness was closing. Then, as quickly as they had vanished, the irregulars began to return. One by one they appeared, their small faces flushed with the excitement of the mission. Their reports delivered in a series of urgent whispered messages. The news they brought was both encouraging and deeply alarming. The chapel was indeed occupied. They had seen lights in the windows and the dark, hulking shapes of men moving about inside. They had identified 2 guards posted outside, one at the front entrance, another at the back. They were large, brutish men, armed with cudgels, their demeanor one of watchful, alert boredom. But it was the final piece of information, delivered by Wiggins himself, that sent a chill down my spine. "There's another one, Mr. Holmes," he whispered, his eyes wide. "A toff, a real gentleman. He arrived just a few minutes ago in a hansom cab. A tall fellow with a big black mustache. He went inside the chapel, looked like he was in a real hurry. Moran, he had beaten us to it. He was already inside the chapel with his men and with his prisoner. The race was over and we had lost. Or had we?" A strange, almost feral smile played on Holmes's lips. "He is not early, Watson," he said, his voice a low, triumphant whisper. "He is right on time. He has walked into our trap, though he doesn't yet know it." He explained his reasoning, his mind moving with a breathtaking speed and clarity. Moran's arrival at the chapel was not a sign of our failure, but a confirmation of our success. He had been flushed out, forced to act. He was a cornered man, and a cornered man makes mistakes. He has come to silence Vance, Holmes deduced, his eyes gleaming with a cold, hard light. He knows the police have his men, that his society is broken. He knows it is only a matter of time before they talk, before his name is given. His only hope is to eliminate the one witness who can definitively link him to the Ketta conspiracy. He has come to commit the final murder himself. The situation had become a tinderbox, a volatile and explosive confrontation waiting to happen. We were no longer on a rescue mission. We were on a mission to prevent a murder in progress. "But what of the execution you spoke of, Holmes?" I asked, my mind struggling to keep pace with his rapid-fire deductions. "The public tribunal." "A fabrication, my dear Watson," he replied, his voice filled with a grudging admiration for our adversary's cunning. "A piece of theater for his men, to keep them loyal, to keep them focused on the prize of revenge. Moran never had any intention of a public execution. It was always his plan to dispose of Vance quietly, secretly, when the time was right. And the time is now." He turned to me, his face a mask of grim resolve. "We have no more time for planning, for subtlety. We must act, and we must act now. We must get into that chapel and stop him before it is too late." The final desperate phase of our adventure was upon us. The long night of investigation, of deduction, of narrow escapes had all led to this single explosive moment. Holmes gave his final instructions to Wiggins. The boy and his irregulars were to create a diversion, a loud and chaotic disturbance at the far end of the street, to draw the attention of the guards and the locals, to give us the few precious seconds we would need to breach the chapel's defenses. "Be loud, be bold, but be safe," Holmes told the boy, his hand resting for a moment on his small, thin shoulder. "Your part in this is crucial. Do not fail me." Wiggins nodded, his young face filled with a solemn sense of purpose. He gathered his small army, and with a final determined look at Holmes, they melted back into the shadows. Now, it was just the two of us. Two men against a heavily guarded building and one of the most dangerous criminals in Europe. The odds were absurd. The chances of success slim to the point of non-existence. We made our way to the back of the chapel, a dark, crumbling structure of stone and stained glass. It was a place of forgotten prayers and lingering decay, its sanctity long since violated by the presence of Moran and his dark enterprise. We took up our position in the shadows of a neighboring tenement, our eyes fixed on the back entrance of the chapel, where a single, large guard stood, his cudgel held loosely in his hand, his posture one of bored indifference. And then it began. A sudden eruption of noise from the far end of the street, shouting, the crash of breaking glass, the unmistakable sound of a street brawl. The Baker Street irregulars were playing their part to perfection. The guard at the front of the chapel, his curiosity piqued, moved to investigate the disturbance. The guard at the back, our target, hesitated for a moment, his attention drawn by the commotion. It was the opening we needed. "Now, Watson," Holmes hissed. We moved as one, two dark figures sprinting across the narrow cobbled alley that separated us from the chapel. We covered the ground in a matter of seconds, our movements silent and swift. I reached the guard first. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise, but he had no time to react. I brought the butt of my revolver down on his head with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the ground without a sound, a silent, inert heap in the darkness. Holmes was already at the door, his slender, nimble fingers working at the lock with a set of small, specialized tools. The lock was old and rusted, but it was no match for his skill. With a soft click, the door swung open. We slipped inside, the darkness of the chapel enveloping us. The air was cold and musty, thick with the smell of damp stone and decay. The only light came from a single flickering oil lamp at the far end of the nave, where the altar once stood. And there, in the faint, wavering light, we saw them. 3 figures. 2 of them were large, brutish men, clearly Moran's hired muscle. The third was a man tied to a chair, his head slumped forward in exhaustion and despair. It was Lord Vance, and standing before him, his back to us, was a tall, elegant figure, his hand raised, a long, slender blade gleaming in the lamplight. It was Colonel Sebastian Moran, poised to deliver the final fatal blow. We had arrived in the nick of time. The race against time was over. The final confrontation had begun.